Well, Roman, President Biden's trip today was a bold and decisive move from the United States in the face of the difficulties that arose during the preparations. Biden was repeatedly asked if he'd go to Ukraine. He answered no. Then, when asked why he chose to visit Poland this week, he said nothing and laughed. And now it became clear that the trip was in the works. It was logistically challenging, and according to the White House, it sends a robust signal that the president has faith in the Ukrainian people and is unwavering in supporting them.
Для того, чтобы поддерживать украинский народ. Также он говорит о том, что этот визит говорит о том, что президент Байден непоколебим в стремлении поддерживать украинцев. Визит президента в зону боевых действий.
The U.S. president's trip to a war zone like this is historic, unprecedented, and requires careful planning. Unlike previous presidential visits to war-torn countries such as Iraq and Afghanistan, the U.S. has no military presence in Ukraine, making the incumbent's visit all the more difficult. And what's important, this is the first trip of the U.S. president to Ukraine in the last 9 years of Russia's war.
Президента США за 15 лет, как уже сказала Юля, и за последние 9 лет войны России против
It was made clear to us by White House officials that this was the risk that Joe Biden wanted to take. He wanted to stand shoulder to shoulder with President Zelensky and remind the world as the anniversary of the full-scale invasion approaches that Kyiv is not surrendering. This phrase is basically the highlight of this trip. Kyiv still stands.
Kyiv still stands. Что переводится на русский, что Киев действительно до сих пор стоит. Я предлагаю послушать.
Here's what the White House officials said about it.
Комментируют в Белом доме.
One year ago this week, the president said in his remarks in Kyiv, he spoke with President Zelensky as Russian forces were moving across the border, and President Zelensky said to him, "I'm not sure when we're going to be able to speak again." 1 year later, the two men were face-to-face standing together in Kyiv, in a free and independent city, in a free and independent country.
Высокопоставленный представитель Белого дома рассказал нам сегодня во время специального закрытого звонка, что...
A senior White House official told us that Washington notified Moscow of President Biden's trip to Kyiv hours before the trip. The officials did not go into details of the Kremlin's response or reaction. In Kyiv, the president spoke about the needs of Ukraine in terms of energy infrastructure, economic support, humanitarian needs, and they also talked about the upcoming session of the UN General Assembly on Ukraine, as well as the Ukrainian formula.
Визит Байдена называют историческим, Рома. Визит Зеленского в Белый дом в декабре 2022 тоже называли историческим.
Biden's visit is called historic, as well as Zelensky's visit to the White House in December 2022, the first trip of a Ukrainian leader abroad since the start of Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine.
Все организовывалось под грифом «секретно», и о том, что Зеленский приезжает в Белый дом, стало известно буквально за несколько часов до этого. Аналитики говорят,
Analysts say these visits are a signal to the Kremlin, and this is how this signal is explained in Kyiv. I talked to Mikhailo Podolyak, an advisor to the head of Zelensky's office. Have a listen. Some analysts here in the US say that this visit is not just a signal of support for Ukraine, but it's such a figural slap in the face, if you like, to the Kremlin. Do you agree with this? Yes, I agree with you. This is a slap. But it looks like a nullification of the traditionally global role that Russia has played over the past 20 years. That is, Mr. Biden very clearly placed emphasis on what modern global politics is, what role the United States plays, what role Ukraine plays, what role the EU as a whole plays, and what a worthless new role the Russian Federation plays. And just on the eve of the anniversary of the Russian invasion, Biden emphasized that the Russian Federation in this form is undoubtedly an aggressor, a threat to a global democratic system, and accordingly the threat must be dealt with radically. In my opinion, this is a very clear and correct signal. These are absolutely important accents at this stage of the war, which Mr. Biden placed specifically on the spot and on the point. At the same time, actually, the president was risking his safety. This is the first visit by the US president since the start of Russia's war against Ukraine 9 years ago. I would even say that he has more clearly and correctly assessed the situation. The President of the United States has come to a country under attack, where there is a war, and where the United States military is not present. Biden demonstrated that when fundamental values are at stake, the President of the United States clearly takes all the risks and is ready to bear them in full.
Рома, ну и сегодня в США отмечают
On
День
a side note,
президента,
Roman,
President's
Americans
Day,
celebrate
это
President's Day
федеральный
today.
праздник,
And as I
и
see on
некоторые
Twitter, some
пользователи
users
Твиттера,
joke
например,
about
вот
this
если
trip.
листаю ленту, шутят о том, что
They say
президент
this
Байден
is
решил
quite a
отпраздновать
way
этот день
to
с размахом.
celebrate it.
Рома?
Михаил Комадовский из Белого дома